Hello, and welcome to episode 74 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin, and that's Kevin.
I don't know what to do in life, Colin. I'm being drawn by so many different directions. I want to do things my own way, Colin. I want to go where I want to go, do what I want to do. I want to chart my own path in life. That's why I'm gonna join the police.
I thought you were going to say that's why you dropped out of the academic job market and decided to seize your own life by the horns and take control of your life.
No, the only means of production I'm seizing are well, there's none actually, so that's a bad transition.
That's pretty bad. Um, but yeah, we're talking about this light novel. What even is it called now? I forget. Four Destinies?
Four destinies.
So the whole point of this light novel is that, well, number one, it's a novelization of a specific episode in Trails from Zero, which is interesting in its own right. But like the middle part of it are four separate stories that are fleshing out the backstories of Lloyd, Elie, Randy, Tio, before transitioning back into the first encounter the SSS has with Wazi and Wald and figuring out that Ravash is manipulating them and all that kind of thing.
This is about a 1,000 or so word light novel, so about what you would expect
Did you
from that kind.
did you just say it was 1,000 words?
50,000.
50,000. Okay, like that thing actually took me a while to read, in different fits and starts. So definitely not 1,000. Yeah, I would in the PDF it's 129 pages.
Yeah, and 320 in the printed format. Published in January 2012, right after the release of Trails from Zero. I thought half of this was interesting.
Half of
Maybe
it
not
is.
the most well written, but it was quite interesting. I do think the common theme, the common question that unites why the SSS joined the police is one we can grapple with, in particular with Lloyd. However, Colin, half of this did not need to exist. The novelization of chapter one of Zero, there was nothing new.
No, and that was a bit boring. I want to pick up a little bit of what you said about how it's not the best written. And I think that's something that ultimately we can't really judge. And the reason why, sorry for my cough, I'm feeling a bit sick. Well, I don't even know if I'm that sick, but I was sick, and now my roommate's sick, so I don't know what's going on with me. In any case, this thing was initially published in Japanese, and it was not officially localized at all. So what we have is a fan translation of the novel. There are some problems with it that perhaps just reflects stylistic things that are easier to ascertain in Japanese than in English that we just don't know. But for instance, it will regularly switch from third person to first person without warning. Sometimes it is unclear as to who is speaking. Normally, we can tell this by looking at the style or by looking at the surrounding context, but not always the case. And in some parts, I think actually the stories can be quite interesting and thematic, but other times it can be quite, dull. It can be a little bit superficial as well. But what I'm more happy about is the fact that we're able to read it at all. So I don't know who translated this. I found a PDF about 2 months ago, but the fact that it even exists in English form is something to be thankful for. So I'm glad that we had the chance to read it.
I have two things to say. One, as always, we are grateful to the fan translators. More content to be able to look at, to interrogate is great as part of the Kiseki verse. Like we talked about for the Back Alley Doctor episode, like we talked about for the audio drama, not the greatest, but we're glad we were able to go in, read it or listen, and make that distinction, make that conclusion ourselves. And there is some really interesting stuff in the first half here. The second, I would like to issue a correction to a statement of mine that I made. Released in January 2012, right after the release of Azure, the second game in the Crossbell series, which I find kind of interesting. We get the background of the SSS Core 4, the novelization of Chapter 1 of Zero, a couple of months after the sequel got released.
Hmm.
Maybe it was production issues delayed it. Maybe I don't know what exactly, but you would have thought, why not release this around or right after Zero? Why? We don't know. I doubt we'll know, but it's just something interesting to think about. But now,
No, I mean, I want to say that real quick, that's kind of interesting because there are no spoilers for Azure in here. Not even stuff that, like, as a reader, like as a player of Azure, you would catch, and then somebody who hasn't played it wouldn't catch. There's nothing like that in here. At least that comes through with the fan translation. It really did feel to me like a companion piece to Zero in the same way that the Roads to the Future audio CD was.
so I'll be interested then. So my next question was going to be, I wonder what will make sense or what details within the novel that will be revealed in Asda, but it sounds like there's none. So again, why not release this a year earlier, 2011, to capitalize off the 2010 release of Zero, one of life's imponderable questions, which gets us to the four stories. Questions and uncertainty are at the heart, especially Lloyd's. They go Lloyd, Elie, Keo, Randy. Their background right before they joined the SSS, but also why did they join
Yeah.
and what are they grappling with? I think there's some really cool stuff that we saw. For Lloyd, we don't get him like I thought we would with his brother still alive. It's him at the police academy, his the very end of the police academy, a couple of weeks at most before the start of Zero. He's talking to one of his instructors who is retiring to go spend time with his grandchildren and children outside of Crossbells. So it seems that immigration is pretty common. So that's always something interesting to note. I wonder if we've ever met someone in Libero who was from Crossbell.
Yes, we have.
I don't think so. Oh,
We
who?
have. Well, number one, we've met Ren, so that's one.
Like, born in Crossbell? I
I don't know
mean,
born in Crossbell, but certainly the family is based in Crossbell, and she told us when she was visiting that she was from there. Um, Now, granted, she wasn't coming from Crossbell, but much like A Saint's Life in late antiquity, we can look at that episode in terms of plausibility in cultural scripts. But there is a side quest in which I believe it was somebody moved either from Calvert or Erebonia into Liberal, and like their family was still from abroad, which suggests that there is some movement. I don't think it was Crossbell in that case, but I could be wrong, and I'm sure some of our loyal listeners, like Pork Bob, will instantly recognize the quest and tweet at us that I'm wrong, and that's fine.
it's fine because I am never wrong. Colin is always wrong. Thesis, antithesis, combined for a synthesis of the perfect podcast.
Right. That being sometimes wrong.
Wait, no. Okay, moving on. So, Instructor Jeffrey asks his class open-ended questions. Some of it are designed to have answers. Why does the victim's family have so much knowledge? And he makes this comment how police they don't advocate on behalf of the crying victims. It's for the state. Justice, not retribution. And that's always a key dynamic of what role does the victim play, the family play in the justice system if they
Yeah, but
want to prosecute, if they
the
don't.
the point of that exercise, though, was not to say that the police shouldn't be trying to get revenge on behalf of the victims. It was to point out that we cannot be blinded by empathy for the victim's family, and to then realize, oh, there's actually something wrong here. It's to push for objective analysis as opposed to emotional reasoning.
So I see that, and that's one my error in the interpretation of the scene. And I could apply a postmodernist interpretation to that and ignore everything uncomfortable, but I won't.
Are you Tony Woodman reading Tacitus?
Exactly.
Um,
Next,
by the way, something that I want to point out, and I'm sure that this is not a detail that is really meant by the authors, but it's just something that I've been trying to deal with. I'm teaching classes, and most of the time, if you ask students an open-ended question, they will stare at you and not really engage. And then you have to keep pushing them until they finally give you an answer. Uh, at least that's the case in a course in which the students don't actually want to be there because it's a requirement. Uh, if this professor is getting success, asking open-ended questions and having students really grappling with these puzzles, then it indicates two things. A, that this is actually a very good and talented instructor, and B, that the people there are engaged, that they want to be there. They're really trying to engage with the content of the class. Um, I don't think pointing this out adds anything to our appreciation of the novel. I'm just grappling with these problems myself, and I have a newfound appreciation for this man.
Lloyd is, or I think he is, on the bit of the younger side at age 18,
I
but
thought he was
also as we
17, wasn't he?
discussed, 17. As we've discussed, adolescence does not seem to entirely exist as we understand the term in the Kaseki universe of this delayed childhood, this transitional period into adulthood. One, two, you imagine being self selecting into the police academy, into a class on investigations would hopefully, ideally, produce more engaged students.
One of the questions that, well, I guess to finish up the summary, turns out that Lloyd had to be recommended to take the detective exam, takes the exam, passes it, is talking to his instructor, the one who recommended him, and the instructor asked him another open-ended question, which is, all right, we're the police. There's a crime that happens. We got the guy dead to rights. But that person is a high status person in the Erebonian Empire. Do you press charges? Do you prosecute? Lloyd's answer to this question is I don't know, because it's a very complicated situation. Crossbell is a border state. They have to deal with the importance of upholding the sanctity of their own laws, but also you have to balance your relationship with Erebonia. I'm curious, Kevin, what would you do?
I'll talk what I would do, but first, I want to say I really like Lloyd's answer. He's unsure and he's willing to admit it. I think a lot of JRPG protagonists would say, doesn't matter about anything else. We got to do justice, got to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Lloyd is acknowledging he is living in a world of grays, that Crossbell is a weak secondary power compared to Erebonia, compared to Calvert, and that always will and must influence even what is primarily a domestic institution of law enforcement, one of the signs of an independent state. He's able to acknowledge we're not fully independent. We exist at the sufferance, at the willingness of two greater bordering powers, and that's going to be an important variable to consider. It feeds into this almost noir, film noir like setting that I've talked about going through Trails from Zero.
Yeah. He recognizes that complexity. Um, and so he draws a blank. He reaches a state of aporia. I don't know, which turns out is also the same answer that Guy Bannings had given when he was asked the same question. But now I ask my question again. I swear, sometimes you're like my students who I ask a question and then they say
I
things.
said first.
Yeah, but I'm waiting for the second. What's your answer, Kevin?
Most of me says I don't know. would depend on the political situation. Where does Crossbow stand with Erebonia vis-a-vis Calvert at that moment in time? Part of me then says prosecute, use it as a political tool as well as a tool of internal justice law enforcement. Use it to assert the independence of the Crossbow state against Erebonia. That may involve doing a temporary measure to placate Erebonia or placate Calvert as a counterbalance or to restore relations. But you got to remind them every so often that you can't treat us like an open puppet all the time.
I think there has to be a couple of more certain pieces of knowledge in order to actually make a decision. The first would be what?
Do you remember one of the early cases, the early side support requests involved the smuggling
Mhm.
ring or the thief?
Yeah,
That was fairly similar.
it was, and I think ultimately they weren't. Did we press charges?
It was a slap on the wrist, and it's interesting that Lloyd was very annoyed. The SSS as
Mhm.
a whole, they were very annoyed. So it's a bit less morally gray complex in the JRPG than the light novel.
I mean,
But also, and I mentioned this to you in a message while reading it, the light
yeah.
novel, the media, it's more gritty than the
Mhm.
games. The media, these companion novels in the game, the associated media tends to be a bit more gritty than the games themselves. And I wonder why.
Yeah, I don't know. And what's interesting to me is, and then I want to return to the question we were discussing, but I am well known at this point for thinking that the narrative in Tales into Reverie is pretty shit. I did not like Hajimari's story that much. But what I really liked is at the end, when you do the post game, there is a set of three short stories that you unlock for beating the final boss. And those are excellent. Those are really good. They set up Kuro very well, but much like this light novel, it brings back the grittiness. It brings back this dark realia that really is at some of the highest points of the Trail series. I mean, the reason why Stardor 14 or Stardor 15 is so good is not because it's a good story, like that it's a positive story, but what it's doing is not hiding away from the trauma that Ren experienced and lets us view it like through her eyes. That's really brave. That's really dark. That's really gritty, and it's why it's so successful. It's why it's one of the best moments of the series. And so, anytime that Trails Media approaches that, where it like really looks at the darkness of the world, that's when it gets interesting. And I agree with you that some of the side media, not all of it, because the drama CDs definitely don't, but this light novel explores that a bit more. But even some of like at the end of Reverie, where it's still in the game, it's just a short story in the game. There, it's also present, and I don't know what it is about the written word, the written prose like that, that they feel they can get away with it, whereas in the actual narrative of the game, they've stopped doing it. But this is a question that we will continue to discuss. Back to the question at hand. Something that I think that we run into whenever we're doing political analysis, we often forget that the sign of a good political actor is changing situations to best fit them. So, yes, it is easy to look at a situation in which you say, like, okay, Erebonia, um, they're very powerful. We are dependent upon them. Our government officials are in favor of them. There's a high-ranking official there, did a crime. What do we do? We probably let them go away. But if I'm the police chief, and I'm looking for a way out of that situation, and I decide that I want to prosecute, or if I'm like Mayor McDowell, right? If you make the decision to prosecute, there are ways to do it that's are able to satisfy both parties that allows you to uphold the sanctity of your laws while also fighting back again, by also satisfying Erebonian. There are weak ways to do it, and there are strong ways to do it. So the weak way to do it would be to identify an accomplice that the Erebonian person is working with in Crossbell and punish that person and make them the figurehead. This is a way for you to keep the sanctity of the laws in front of your own citizens, but it does nothing to punish Erebonia, right? That's letting the official go. That's a way you can go about it. At the very least, it's upholding a myth about the laws. You're putting on a performance of upholding them. But another way to do it, and frankly, it's kind of inspired by the US's actions vis-a-vis Putin's invasion of Ukraine, publicize it widely. Details about this person's criminal activity should be found in the pages of newspapers in Liberl, in Calvert, in Remifaria, in Lehman, and even in Erebonia, if the press is allowed to do that. But if it's published in a foreign press, it will probably be picked up eventually in Erebonia. You target that individual to the point where the government cannot keep up appearances by supporting them. Then you're able to prosecute, or at the very least, you're able to then approach, like, arrest the guy, and then approach Ereboni and say, "We'll extradite him to you in exchange for something else." I mean, that triggers a negative reaction from Erebonia. It depends on how high status and untouchable this guy is. But there are strategies that Crossbell could do in the wider international community that I don't think has been considered by the light novel.
No. But the fact they consider the political implications at all is a step in the fact they consider the political implications at all, I think that's a step in the right direction for making the world complex and having verisimilitude. It's not real, but making it seem
Yeah,
like it is real.
absolutely. And that's something that is very strong about Ellie's story as well. To be honest, with Lloyd's story, we don't learn that much about Lloyd. We see him go through the
You
motions. It's kind of already like we can already see how he gets into the SSS. It's not a big deal. With Elie, we really see more and more about the things that she was grappling with when she decided to become a police officer. And one of them was relied upon a point about the Bracer Guild that you had brought up when we were talking about the Liberal games. So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Well, turns out I was unintentionally plagiarizing from a light novel published a dozen years ago, so mea culpa on that. What I said, and what this light novel and Ellie's thoughts puts into direct textual, literal readings. Bracer Guild, it's not egalitarian in how cases are given, how they're picked up, the rewards, what say you. The common person has much less access to, quote, justice or maybe more resolution with regards to the Bracer Guild than of someone with means, either financial or political. Mayor Mabel, for example. So it's hierarchy, status based, tiers based, the Bracer Guild. The police don't have this selectivity. They have to take these cases. And so Elie wants to help Crossbell because she knows from reading books about international theory and politics, from doing school exercises, Crossbell is a weak state. It is not a fully independent state. This is at the forefront of her mind. She wants to help improve Crossbell's reputation. The police going into that, doing a great job, would be a very good way of doing that because, Colin, is the Bracer Guild a Crossbell institution?
No.
It's not. It's international. That allows it to do a lot of good stuff, like we saw in previous games, but it's not Crossbell. It's a branch of the guild in Crossbell. You help do a lot of good work. You improve the prestige of the Bracer Guild, not
Mhm.
of the Crossbell state. And so this is really a large part of why she decides to join the police force for the time being to help make Crossbell a more sturdy, independent state.
I really like that this point is made in the novel because it highlights some of the complexities that we can deduce exist, right? You've already deduced that. But what we hadn't actually seen is that making an impact on the bracer activity in the games at all, right?
No.
We don't really see anybody complaining about, oh, I submitted this to the Bracer Guild and it didn't get picked up and now my problem wasn't solved. We maybe see a bit complaining about how there's too much work to handle, but the assumption is that all of the work will get done. Um, and in a way, I think it highlights a lost opportunity that Trails from Zero had, right? We had talked during our like wrap up episode for that game that it kind of raises this question about, you know, what advantages does the Bracer Guild have and what advantages does the police have? You know, if there's any kind of tension there. And my point was that, well, for the most part, the police come off as shit throughout the whole game, and that the only time that we are good is when we act like bracers. And functionally, the SSS are acting like bracers, even to the point where we are being paid like bracers for the completion of missions. Where that money is coming from, I guess it's from the CPD. I don't know why they're paying us by mission and not paying us a salary, but in either case, functionally, we're just like bracers. There's very little to say, like, this is why the police are better than the bracers in the game. This book shows us why the police might be more advantageous than the Bracer Guild. And it would have been really interesting to show that, well, yes, the Bracer Guild is more popular than the police in Crossbell for X, Y, and Z reasons. There are things being left through the cracks that are causing real problems on the ground. You know, downtown would have been a great area to explore that in. We do it a little bit with the gangs because the Bracers don't get in there that much either, but not really. And I think that this core problem is a really interesting one that I mean, I'm glad that the light novel brought it up because it means that Falcom's actually thinking about it.
It's a great interrogation on unequal justice, on the effects of money and prestige for navigating problems of life. And Colin, we have this high. It's a good high. Then we take a roller coaster straight down to fucking Mirabelle doing her thing.
No, I will say I think there's a little bit of value in this passage, both for my own cultural understanding and for actually understanding Ellie's mentality. It highlights another strength of this light novel. So, Maribel is quite, let's say, touchy-feely with Ellie. A bit possessive, a little bit physical, uh, maybe a little bit too much physical. And in the words of the novel, it states that Maribel is into something called skinship, which I had never heard of before. And if you Google it, it appears to be a custom in Japan and South Korea where people of the same gender are comfortable with intimate nudity and physical touching in a platonic, non-sexual manner, but as a way to build bonding between like two equals. I don't really understand that myself. Do not want to see Kevin naked. I doubt he wants to see me naked. Very few people do. But, you know, at the very least, okay, this is putting Maribel's actions in this context of this concept that maybe makes her behavior make more sense. But then on the flip side, what we get in the novel that we don't get in the game is Ellie's thoughts about Maribel's sexual harassment, where it's quite clear that Elie actually is not a fan of this, but puts up with it because her and Maribel are friends. You know, in the game, you get like public reactions of like, you know, Belle, this is not the place, that kind of thing. But in the light novel, we can really see that like she is not a fan of it at all, but she puts up with it because she cares about her friend. And that's a really interesting characterization of Elie, and it's a strength of the novel because we actually get to get into the heads of these characters, where in game we don't. So I just want I know you said that's a low point, probably because of the skinship thing, but I thought it was one of the best parts of the novel.
I have a question for you. based on what we know about Elie from the game, does it surprise you at all? She's a bit of a passive martyr with regards to her personal relationships. Given how she was raised, does it surprise you? I think I'm leading with what I think on the subject. She's willing to put up with a lot for someone who, is showing genuine, even if weird, affection for her. Like, what was her home life like growing up with regards to that?
Right. I mean, like her parent. Well, number one, let's just deal with the fact that her parents both left. Which my understanding of that would be that okay, well, you have these two paragons of love in your life that have now vanished. Uh, divorced ch children of divorced parents, when they get divorced very young, tend to blame themselves for their parents' departure, whether or not they rationally recognize it as the case. So I don't know if this is where you were going, but I could see a situation in which Elie subconsciously feels like, okay, if somebody is showing her true and genuine affection, she shouldn't do anything to alienate that, even if she finds it expressed in a form that she doesn't like. But also, like in the games, we do see her kind of be a little bit passive. We see Randy make inappropriate comments that Elie might make a little bit of a remark about, but like ultimately doesn't do anything about it. So I think that that's consistent with her characterization. The difference is that we get to see her true thoughts about it, where in the games we have to infer it.
Yeah, and another way of making text what was subtext reasonable subtext inferences, but like with Lloyd, Crossbell is thinking about the same things we're thinking. They're aware of these issues.
Yeah.
So when you put it like that, the Mary Bell stuff does take on more complexity and weight and meaning. So I'll give you that.
So we've talked a lot about Lloyd. We've talked a lot about Elie, and I think that these stories raise interesting things. What did you think about Tio and Randy's story? Or stories, I should say. There's two separate
I
ones.
found Randy more interesting than Tio, less than Lloyd and Elie.
I think I agree. But Tio comes next. I'm not really sure what to say about it. I mean,
What new do we get?
so we'll give the brief summary and then talk about what new there is. So it's two-part flashback. It's a flashback to the moments where she is being escorted back to Remefaria by Guy Bannings, and Guy is like trying to encourage her to be happy, to find happiness. He's trying to connect with her. This is how Tio becomes obsessed with Mishi, is because Guy Bannings is giving her a strap with a Mishi figurine on it. I think we know that already in Zero, but we might not. It goes a little bit into how she was ostracized as a child for being too sensitive, like too much physical stimuli led her to be withdrawn. And so she ended up being treated like an outsider because, I mean, in effect, she is. She doesn't behave like a normal person. And so then she decided to join up with, I forget the name of the factory, the Epstein Foundation. And we know that she's testing some of their technology. We've seen in some kind of the weird ways that she does it. I personally don't know how somebody would dive into cyber data, but she seems to be able to physically do it. And then she decides she's not happy anymore. And so she manipulates Chief Roberts to approve her transfer to Crossbell and to work with the SSS in order to test out her staff. Practically the only thing that we learn new is that Sergey recognizes her during their interview and decides to pick her because he thinks the SSS would give her the opportunity to figure out what would actually make her happy. Um, so he didn't pick Tio on the basis of testing out the orbital staff. That was just the pretense that Tio thought of in order to get there. So the new thing is that Tio has agency in deciding to get there. She wasn't assigned. She pushed for it. She made that call because of the connection with Guy Bannings. And we see that Sergei had selected her specifically for a reason that would benefit her. That's interesting, I guess. What did you think?
You could put it as part of an arc of Tio, like you said, being more active, having more agency, where she's becoming her own person after the cult, after the Epstein Foundation, under the protective aegis of the SSS. But that's in Trails from Zero game, and I also assume Azure as well. It's not really in here. It's the cyberspace stuff. It's Lloyd. It's I don't know. It's hints, a prelude, but the development is in the game itself. For Elie, it's the interesting stuff is in the text. For Lloyd, the interesting stuff is in the text.
But I think the other thing is that what's interesting about Lloyd and Ellie's story, ironically, it's not the actual story that's being told about Lloyd and Ellie. It's
No,
the novel using Lloyd and Ellie to further explore the complexities of the world that is Crossbell. And I think that's something that kind of come up again and again. We get really interested in the world building aspect. In many ways, Crossbell is a more interesting character than Lloyd is. But we like the SSS because that is our vehicle to explore Crossbell. Tio's story is about Tio, and therefore it's less interesting.
it's less interesting because, and I'm for me specifically, I'm generally more interested in characters than worlds for my media. I think having the focus on Tio shines a light on the difficulty of prologues or preludes because you know what the end is going to be, where they have to be before the real meat action begins. Tio's growth comes in Zero, and also, I bet, Azure. There's a very tight limit of what she can do and change in any kind of preparatory material because then she won't be at a spot able to change for the main media. Does this make sense at all?
Yeah, I feel you. Um, Something that I kind of like about the light novel is that at least I get the impression that it is kind of aware that we've already played the games. I do think it's comprehensible if you haven't. And maybe I'm wrong, given the fact that half of the book is a summary of stuff you've played, which I don't think is that interesting. But at the very least, it is very aware that it's a prologue. And so, I mean, I do think it's making a very good attempt at providing depth to the characters. You know, they're not trying to give you these um, brand new interpretations of the character that kind of stand apart from where how they're presented in the games. It fits very well into the characters that we've already learned to know and love. Then the problem just becomes, well, is that a project worth pursuing? Uh, with Teal personally, I don't think it was. I don't think that the story itself is that interesting, other than, you know, Teal gets a bit more agency. I think that's important. We see also her handling Chief Roberts. I really don't respect Chief Roberts at all. I gotta say, like, he is just way too obsessed with Tio, way too overprotective of Tio, and good on Tio for, stopping him from doing that and going her own way. But other than that, definitely my least favorite story of the third. But I can say least favorite. Did I find it like super compelling? No, but I didn't find it bad neither. Um, every single word of prose in this is way better than the drama CD. Out of the three pieces of media that we've covered for this interlude, this was the best for sure.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. I agree with all you said on that. And this with Randy, it gives us more information to, why he left the CGF. It puts the lie to some of the early things that he said that he later talked about, why he left. At first, he would made a, the flippant joke. deflecting, then talked about his just disgust with the corruption of the CGF. Here we see where does Randy's interlude start? And I think it's really important understanding this chapter and for Randy as a character overall. Where do we begin, Colin?
He's in the middle of a battlefield where he's hugging a dying, I believe, innocent person, and that death impacts him a lot. I will say, to you, that might come off as new information, but if you look at his bonding event, this had been mentioned. This had been discussed in the game. Uh, and so there's pluses and minuses to it. On the one hand, this novel is providing us with essential information about Randy's characterization that you probably would have missed if playing it for the first time, just given the fact that most people are going to choose Elie for the bonding event. So it's good that this is available in an easily, readable format. On the other hand, it is also then showing that that episode that most people will think is like super original of the novel is actually based off of pre-existing material.
It shows Randy is not one of those who can just go to war, experience war, and just be fine, just compartmentalize. It affects him long after the combat has passed.
Yeah,
It's not PTSD, but it's the ghosts are still haunting him to an extent. He's a functional person, but there's a weight that it'll be difficult to dislodge. And it's looking like his arc, or one of them in the Crossbow games, is lessening that weight. There, but not suffocating.
sure. So we get a little bit of him as a Jaeger. Most of the story is him being in the CGF. One of the best parts about this is that it gives us more of a look into the relationship between Randy and Morale. I'm not really sure. How do you pronounce her name?
Miriel,
Morel?
Miriel.
Muriel. Okay, let's say Muriel. Um, what I like about this is that it's clear that Randy and Muriel have a relationship of some sort in Zero. Uh, but it's a relationship that's already gone through stuff that we didn't see. And so while they clearly feel like there's a connection there, we don't feel that connection on account of we're just being told that it exists. We're not shown that it exists. And in this light novel, we're being shown that it exists. So it fills an essential hole in Randy's backstory, in my opinion.
We also get information on the weapons procurement system of the Crossbow Guardian Force, and that is also really good to know. Who does not want information on procurement in their fantasy games and media?
I mean, I want it. I think it's really interesting.
No,
Both.
it was good. It was actually good.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. You have the head of the CGF. I forget his name, but this low life guy. Uh, he shows up and he makes every soldier stand in a line in order to show the imperial leaning faction members of the Diet, this great defense force that we have. And the reason why we know about the procurement process is that while everybody else is holding a rifle, Randy is holding onto his stun halberd. Why? He doesn't like the rifle. Um, Probably refers back to his Jaeger days, so he chooses this hand-to-hand combat thing with the stun halberd. The head of the CGF goes apoplectic and starts screaming about how I'm the one who procured us the state of the art weaponry from Erebonia. What the fuck? Why aren't you using it? We need to have this. Go get it right now. To which Randy says, like, I lost it, and it ultimately results in his dismissal. But there's so many layers to that because number one, what's happening here is that the entire point of the inspection is not to actually check on the soldiers, but rather it's to show off to the Diet members that the CGF is good, that's fine, but then also showing that the head of the CGF is giving Erebonia business, right? He's trying to show that the CGF is Erebonia facing, economically dependent upon Erebonia, which also benefits the Diet members, that there's a symbiosis going on between Erebonia and the CGF, which Randy is spitting in the face of by holding on to the stun halberd inadvertently, right? He doesn't care about Ereboni or anything like that. But then the text goes on to detail how even though he's bragging about getting state-of-the-art stuff, which is part of his performance, it's actually not state-of-the-art weaponry. Like this is several generations back, which makes sense from Erebonia's perspective. Why would you give away or sell state-of-the-art machinery that you are producing to a state that borders you, to a quote-unquote rival military? Erebonia doesn't quite see it as rival, but it's either hostile facing or vassal like. In
Do you
no case
think
do you want them to be a peer polity.
what do you think was the knowledge had about this by the Imperial faction, the Diet, by the Colonel of the CGF? Was everyone being performative? Was only the performance for some, not for others? Because I think, just hypothesizing, I'm not sure we can tell one way or the other for certain. I think hypothesizing could be interesting in what kind of information does the circulate, how independent does the Imperial faction think they are?
All right, so I just want to point out that sometimes I've tried to get you to speculate about theoretical matters of international politics, and you're like, no, we're not speculating. That doesn't get us anywhere. And so now you want us to speculate about a fictional world in which we do not have any evidence for these questions. So I'm just pointing that out.
I have never been against speculation. This is a dirty lie, but I'll overlook the slander. Please go on.
That being said, from the little that we know about the CGF commander, I could easily see it that he's being sold a bill of goods by the Erebonian government, and then he's prancing around, declaring that and being very, very happy. We don't know nearly enough about the Imperial faction to know if they are um, also being hoodwinked, or if they are more knowledgeable and are just being very cynical. We don't know. But in terms of the CGF commander, wouldn't surprise me at all if he actually thinks that he has state-of-the-art weaponry. Which also then goes to show that if he does believe that, he's a really shitty commander because the discussion of why Erebonia would not allow that to happen found in the novel should be thought of by the commander of the CGF.
It's it's just interesting to what does a vassal, how much are they willing to accept their vassal, their puppet? They do others' bidding. That's always, I think, really interesting to the psychology of someone who would be willing to be a stooge, in fact. And kind of irrelevant, a halberd can protect, it can like block access, hostile access to, either civilian or just yourself in symbolic ways. A gun cannot. A stun halberd, a lot easier to not kill than a gun. The symbology, what they represent, how Vanity conceives of himself, his role as a soldier, as a warrior, fighting for what he believes is right, fighting because he has orders. It's different for one with a gun, the other with a stun halberd.
It's similar. The symbolism there is kind of similar to Cassius putting aside his sword, picking up a staff. With
Yes.
with Randy, it's not like he's a dedicated member of the CGF. He just took that job because he needed a job, he ends up landing in the SSS because of this incident. He then gets honorably discharged, honorably not in reality but on paper, so as to avoid embarrassment on the part of the CGF. But through that process, Muriel convinces Sonia to recommend to Sergei to pick up Randy for the SSS. And then I think we are able to see Randy take on the promises of the symbolism behind his stun halberd. But I don't think that he had that when he was in the CGF.
Okay. Indeed. Indeed. And it's good to see once again a lot of the people who've experienced combat warfare the most are really the ones who like it the most, who are the most jingoistic, the most hawkish. He's seen battle He does not like it. He's not a fan.
No. Overall, I mean, honestly, I don't think we need to talk about the rest of the novel. The rest of the novel is just covering shit that we already did in the game. It doesn't add much other than reading time. But these four stories, they were pretty interesting. At least they had interesting content. Not always the most interesting to read because of the form, but the content had some interesting stuff.
I agree. We got some really good insights into the world of the Crossbow State, its relations, into the characters, besides Lloyd, not just his interiority, but Elie, but Randy, but Tio to a real but lesser extent. It was good. It's the best of the interlude pieces, like you said. The next episode will be back to games. It will be the prologue to Trails from Azure, and I cannot wait to completely miss something super important, speculate on something that turns out has no meaningful, consequence or whatever. It'll be great.
Well, speaking of speculating on things with no meaningful consequence, and also speaking of kind of the core theme of this book of finding your path through life, I we opened last episode saying I've been very busy trying to find a job. I did hear back from the job, and unfortunately, I did not get the position. I'm not going to name the institution. I'm not trying to send any hate anybody's way. Not that our podcast is big enough to do that. I do think that would be unprofessional. I
Harvard.
do I did want to bring up how a little soul crushing that can be. Um, I worked for like 2 months on this interview. I gave up my Christmas break entirely to prepare for that. I bought a suit. I bought airplane tickets to this place, which I haven't been reimbursed for yet. I worked my batuti off, my tuckus off, however you want to put it, to get this chance of a lifetime of being paid a very low salary to teach at a small liberal arts college with a 3-3 teaching load, which is considered to be quite a lot. Um, and it's part of being a member of academia, and it's one of the reasons why I was contemplating even leaving last year. Uh, in most businesses, if you don't get a job from a job interview, that's fine. You'll just go get another job. There'll be more interviews coming up. Jobs are popping up all over the place. Always an opening. You'll land something eventually. That is not the case with academia. Not at all. This was my shot this year to get a tenure track position. There are still there's still like, temporary positions going up. Who knows if I get any of those? In which case, if I don't get any of those, I need to figure out how I'm going to feed myself because this position I'm pretty sure is done once I'm done with it. So there's that. On top of it, if I do stay in academia, then I got to go through this process again and again and again. And it's a tough world out there. My best friend, he has a postdoc going into Italy, and it lasts a year. His wife owns a house here in Ithaca, and so they're renting out their house to somebody who's going to be here at Cornell on fellowship, somebody who does late antiquity like I do. She's from Australia. The story behind this person, and I can't give her name because I don't know her name, but she actually was a finalist at Cornell in 2015. Athena ended up getting that job, but she was a finalist. She had a campus visit in 2015. She then went and taught in the University of Melbourne for basically a decade, has 3 monographs. Turns out she got the Baylor job, which was a place that I had a Zoom interview for. Um, that's what I'm up against. I'm up against people who have a decade of experience, 3 monographs, which is a fuck ton of monographs. And even
That's a book.
said what?
A monograph is a book.
Yes, a monograph it's a single authored book. She wrote about Methodius of Olympius's Symposium, which is a late antique dialogue, which is notable because women are the primary speakers in that dialogue. I think it's only women. She's written another book on women antiquity in general, and she's recently published a biography of Hypatia of Alexandria. But what I'm saying is that it took her a decade to get to a position like that. Whether she had a tenure track position in Australia or not, I don't know. But also think about it this way: she was a finalist at Cornell. She probably thought she was, good. She would get something. And now she's landing in Baylor a decade later. Baylor is a great university. But I'm up against people who I cannot compete against, and it is indicating that if you want to be competitive, you have to live through this kind of hellish landscape for a decade. I don't know if I can do that. I'm going to have to see. So, I mean, I woke up today. Kevin can be a bit, can see that a little bit from how I've been talking to him today. A little bit lost, a little bit soul crushed a bit. I was optimistic for a while, and I'm seeing my emotions go up and down. And most people, you get rejected from a job, you don't go through this. In academia, being rejected from a job is having your future, having a door to your future shut in your face, and you never know if another one is going to open. Um, so that is also a reason why we did not have an episode last week. But I wanted to share that with you guys just because I know that I've been keeping you abreast of some of those developments and to show this is a tough world out there.
It's tough. There's it's very, 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 very uncommon for, say, double digit tenure track openings in the entire field, let alone ones that you can apply to with your niche specialization and putting your life on hold to go hunting from continent to continent
Yeah,
on temporary positions, not saving up for retirement, not putting money into a pension, into a 401k, leaving support systems. How do you do it with families, small children? You can't. It's a broken system, I think. And a job rejection should not be a door slamming shut into a career choice you spent a decade plus for. It should be, oh, I'm not gonna go at this specific institution, company, department, university, what say you? There'll be another one. And on that cheery note, I'm Kevin. That's Colin. See you next time.
thanks for listening, everybody. Well, we're gonna have Azure next week. I'm gonna get started on it tonight. Bye bye.